Eternals is extremely controversial. In fact, as probably everyone knows by now, it is the first MCU project, not including ABC or Netflix shows, I mean we're talking mainline Marvel Studios stuff, to have a Rotten Tomato. And that really just made me more interested to see this movie. Could it really be as bad as some critics say it is? It can. It really can.
When you said goodbye.
Eternals is directed by Academy Award-winning director Chloe Zhao and has been getting a lot of buzz around Marvel Studios. Kevin Feige has been hyping it up for feels like a couple of years now. They used the Rome Film Festival. Eternals closed it out. Apparently there's some talks in the offices about trying to get it some Oscars. Marvel has just been loving this movie. Half the people, half the critics at least, audience scores a lot higher on this movie. It's really divided. Half the people have not liked this movie. I am in that half. This is not my least favorite MCU movie. In fact, there are things I like. I wouldn't go so far as to say I dislike it. I just have a lot of issues with it. A lot of things I'll discuss in my spoiler video, which should be out not long after this one. So yeah, this was not my least favorite MCU movie, but it's one of my least favorites. There is an insane amount of stuff to talk about with this film. In fact, I'm still processing and unpacking everything. There is so much in this movie, there's no wonder that it's the second longest MCU film. And I want to start off by talking about the characters, because there are a crap ton of them. Too many of them, in fact. There are 10 Eternals in this movie. That is 10 completely different personalities, 10 different motivations, 10 different character arcs, 10 different power sets to introduce in this movie. Way too many characters. So let's talk about them. Half of them I liked, half of them I didn't like. Actually, it's just under half that I really liked. I think I liked 4, and there were 6 I wasn't fond of. Now, Druig, Barry Keoghan's character, was my absolute favorite when he was there. He didn't show up much, which sucked, because I loved him so much from one of his first scenes. And yeah, the issue with having this many characters is you don't really get to flesh them all out. So what bit of fleshing out Barry Keoghan's character got, I absolutely loved. I think he had one of the coolest motives. He also had one of the coolest power sets. I cannot wait to talk about him in spoilers and also do a ranking of the characters. I love this guy. Also, Kingo was pretty cool. That was Kumail Nanjiani's character. Until the very end. I did not like what they did with his character at the end, but we'll talk about that in the spoiler video. Kumail Nanjiani, though, looked like he had an absolute blast doing this movie. I mean, I would. Imagine being a superhero. That would be great. He was also used as the comic relief, and the MCU has a history of having comic relief characters just make jokes all the time. Kumail Nanjiani, I think, was comic relief done right, but he does have this valet guy following him, kind of his little buddy who's documenting the entire journey. I got sick of him, especially because he never really had this character payoff. They kind of set up this moment where he could have this big payoff and contribute something to the story, and he didn't. He was just there to be funny, and he was the character who kind of made ill-timed jokes. Granted, I laughed at them. They were hilarious, but they didn't need to be there. Another character I liked was Makkari. When she showed up, I think she was the Eternal in this movie that had the least amount of screen time, which sucks. She was great, and Lauren Ridloff was so good as this character. And hats off to Chloe Zhao for making the coolest looking speedster on film. Just the camera work, the VFX on her when she's running is great. And we rarely get to see a speedster like running in normal motion, just super fast. Like, the camera does not slow down when Makkari runs. Like, you are seeing Makkari run from everyone else's perspective, and at one point, she's running as fast as she can, and the camera's keeping with her, and you just see the background just whiz by. It's the coolest looking speedster on screen ever. And she was even paired up with Druig at certain points, which I'll talk about in a bit, but the two of them, just give me a spin-off of them. And Ikaris, I think, was fine. He was not my absolute favorite, but he did cool stuff, and he looked cool while doing it. So, it's a thumbs up from me. And everyone else really didn't land for me. Those being Thena, Ajax, Phastos, Gilgamesh, Sprite, and Cersei.
The fact that I forgot Cersei is not a good thing, considering that she's the main protagonist of this movie.
And speaking of Cersei, she's probably the main protagonist. She's credited first. She probably has the most screen time. And she's the most boring protagonist I've ever seen. She has no personality, nothing. Everyone else had so much more personality than her, and I wish one of them would have been the lead of this movie. Richard Madden would have been a great lead for this. He was so charismatic as Icarus. I loved him. Yeah, 10 characters, way too many. Made this movie cram. They could have taken out like 4 of the Eternals. We would have been fine, especially because some of them don't do anything. As I mentioned with Druig and Makkari, some of these characters are paired up. Some of those team-ups are cool. One of those team-ups is not cool. The heart of this film is pretty much Cersei and Icarus and the relationship between them, so I would have expected the relationship between them to be much better than it was. I was not really sold on it. I didn't feel a bunch of chemistry there. I know Richard Madden and Gemma Chan are friends, so I know they kind of have chemistry, so I don't know where it fell apart, but I just wasn't feeling it. The pair-ups I did like, Druig and Makkari, as I mentioned, when they were paired together, it was great, and the movie knows it's great to the point that there's actually a line where the Eternals reference the two of them being paired up, like it's what the audience is thinking. Gilgamesh and Thena have a little partnership in this movie. It's barely shown, but it's better than Cersei and Icarus's. In fact, I feel like Cersei didn't have much chemistry with either of her love interests because Kit Harington's in this movie as Dane Whitman, and I wasn't really sold on that relationship either. In fact, Sprite and Dane Whitman had a better pair up, and the two of them were just like, they were just kind of mates. Like, basically, it just felt like Sprite was being babysat. They got along great. They were cool. Phastos and his husband, who, by the way, is a cameo, have better chemistry than Cersei and either of her love interests. Now, there is a lot of romance in this movie. I'm sure you guys all saw the headline of Marvel having its first sex scene, which, by the way, didn't need to be in this movie. It was so unexciting and really pointless. Some of that romance, though, I don't know why someone didn't step in. There are some uncomfortable romances in this movie. There's some things that happen. I'm like, just why are you going this route with it? And someone probably should have stepped in to stop it. And sometimes this film has huge emotional character moments that you're supposed to be invested in, but they happen before you actually know the characters. Something happens with both Thena and Ajax in what I thought was the first 20 minutes of the movie. And you're supposed to feel upset about it. You're supposed to feel sad. The one that happens with Thena, I will tell you this though, the actual event wasn't sad because I didn't know the characters, but Angelina Jolie's acting in that moment really elevated that scene. She had pretty good. Anyone who's seen the movie probably knows what I'm talking about. But yeah, you're supposed to feel something and you really just don't because it happens before you know any of these characters, and what happens affects all of the Eternals. But you don't know any of the Eternals. I spent the whole movie trying to figure out why I was supposed to care, and then surprise, surprise, an hour and a half later, they told me. Keep that in mind, they told me, because we're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, the story of this film is absolutely massive. You've seen the trailers. It's about gods and the gods of the gods, and then it spans 7,000 years, and it's kind of both an origin story and, like, takes place in the present. It's got dual narratives. It's got all kinds of stuff in this movie. There is a lot going on, and the movie has a dual narrative, one in the past, one in the present. Problem is, storyline in the past is rushed along to its conclusion very, very early in the movie. So with that, let's talk about the pacing of Eternals. I hate, and I am not using that word in an exaggeratory way, I hate the pacing of this movie. It rushes through its past plotline to get to its present day plotline and then grinds to a complete halt. The movie has less action than most Marvel movies, but that's not why it grinds to a halt, and I'll tell you why. What is the number one rule of storytelling? Show, don't tell. This movie tells way more than it shows. And the irony of that is that Chloe Zhao is very good at directing. She has some really good visuals in her movies. And this movie sacrifices that to just tell you everything. The main twist of this movie is told to you. Now, I'm aware you can tell a twist. Darth Vader revealing himself to be Luke's father, spoiler alert by the way, is told to you, and it's great. The issue is, the movie doesn't handle it that well. The exposition on top of exposition, the origin story of the Eternals, and the twist of the movie and the plan of the bad guy is not learned by the Eternals. It is told to them through a 4-minute long exposition scene where the character listening doesn't really do much except just stand there and look confused. It's so funny how passive the Eternals are in their own movie. They don't figure anything out. They're just told everything. Then they just show up for the final battle because the movie needs your typical Marvel third act. Although I will say, I think the final fight was pretty good. I enjoyed it. Although by the point it kicked in, I was ready for the movie to end. I think got to the point, I was like, this is too long, just let it end already. It was kind of dull. It also doesn't help that it takes 2/3 of this 2.5 hour long movie to reveal what the main conflict is. I kid you not. That's how long it takes before the Eternals and the audience learn what they're fighting for. And what is the main conflict? It's in the trailer. End of the world. I did not feel a thing when they introduced that. I was never worried, never invested in that conflict, and the kind of thematic elements and the message behind that conflict is so poorly conveyed that it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. It's just boring. It could work if the movie tried. The movie didn't try. I think the movie thinks it tried, but it didn't try. And the deviants, who are the villains of this movie as advertised, are so pointless. In fact, the main villain, the main deviant, his name is not spoken in the movie. Unless you have any of the toys and his name is on it, or you watch the credits of the movie, or you're a diehard and you'll look him up, you will not know who this villain is. They do not name him in the movie. And in fact, him and the deviants are so pointless to the plotline that basically if you took the main villain out of the movie, it doesn't change anything. Absolutely nothing has changed. But okay, positives. Let's talk about a couple things I liked. I mentioned that sometimes the themes and messages of this movie didn't work. Everything in the present day, in terms of messages, I didn't like at all. What I really did dig, though, was in the past. I think this whole movie could have been set in the past. The things they do with the characters. The heavy lifting for character work in this movie happens in the flashbacks. I use heavy lifting lightly. But there's some great stuff in the past. And I just would have preferred more of that over the present day plot lines. And that's where the heavy stuff is. There are some flashbacks where I'm like, wow, this is heavy. They show things like bombing in Hiroshima, slaughtering of the Aztecs, and how the Eternals react to that, and their different viewpoints on that. I loved that. Whole movie would have been better if it took place in the past. The action was pretty good. As I said, I really did enjoy the third act, but the action was pretty cool. As I mentioned also, Makkari's running is beautiful. Icarus's eye beams looked cool. Icarus just looked cool in general. They all looked incredible while fighting. By the way, Icarus flies very gracefully. Yeah, I just like the action. There are Celestials in this movie. This is another big positive for me, because there are a couple Celestials in this movie. And when they show up, the few scenes when the Celestials show up, they are imposing, they're threatening, and they are terrifying. It's insane to basically see the proportion of a Celestial to a human as an ant to a human. That's these monstrosities, and every time they're on screen, they just command your attention. Every time a Celestial was on screen, I felt something that I didn't feel in the rest of the movie. And that feeling was anything at all. I will say that the end of this movie feels pretty rushed, but there were some good moments in there. One involving Icarus, which I thought was cool. And this is a good point to talk about how many damn metaphors there are in this movie, because there are probably too many metaphors. I do want to touch on Chloe Zhao real quick. She directed this movie. She won Best Director for Nomadland at the Oscars. And it's no secret why she won that award. She can direct. She's good at directing. Her movies look great. This movie is directed well. It is shot well. It is visually stunning. My issues do not lie there. So you know how in Wonder Woman 1984, terrible movie by the way, when Diana is just able to make the jet disappear first try, and then she's able to fly first try, and they're both really stupid. Yeah, this movie does stuff like that a lot, and actually, one of the things this movie does where a character gets something they shouldn't be able to get first try makes everything stupid that happened in Wonder Woman 1984 look really easy. Like, I now will know, if I ever rewatch Wonder Woman 1984, that's a Mad Size Diff, and I see Diana turn the jet invisible, I'm not going to react like, oh, that's BS, because I saw one of the characters in this movie do something more insane than that. And that thing, we're going to talk about in spoilers, by the way. Now, a lot of people are saying that people wanted to see Marvel do something different and then complain when they did something different. And that's true to some degree. I've seen a lot of reviews like that, but that's not why I don't like this movie. I am not going to say that people, myself included, don't like this movie because it's different. It's just because it's not a good movie. The movie wants to be something different but falls into the typical MCU, but then when it wants to be typical MCU stuff, it fails. What happened? So yeah, I'm not really sure what it wants to be. It seems like an indie film, which I honestly don't think is a problem. But there are certain times where it seemed like a $2 million film with a $200 million budget. And I think that the biggest crime Eternals makes is thinking that it is much more bold, daring, and different than it actually is. This movie thinks it is something else. It thinks it's something extraordinary, and it executed it terribly, and it does not feel like any of those things. I am going to give Eternals a C-. There are a couple post-credit scenes, stay for them. They're interesting. The first you already know. If you saw the tweet that I think it was a guy from Variety tweeted out after the premiere. And to that guy, I got this for you right there. Enjoy that, you asshole. The second one is more exciting. I like the second one. But guys, that's going to be it for my non-spoiler review of Eternals. Definitely leave your thoughts on the movie down below, and stay tuned for my spoiler review, where I will go in depth on everything I touched on in this review. It won't be a play-by-play of the movie, just things that stand out and that I want to talk about. Also, I think I do want to do a character ranking of the main 10 Eternals. So, stay tuned for those videos. So leave a like on this video, subscribe, click on the bell icon to receive all notifications from the MCU HQ. That's going to be it. Have a great day, guys.